It demands that we tell sinners the whole truth.
We will not go quietly into the night.
Voice of truth says this is for my glory.
Christian Cornerstone Podcast.
I want to welcome you guys back to another episode of the year. We're going through 52 of the greatest stories of the Bible, brought to you by Kenneth Boa and John Allen Turner. They created a book called The 52 Greatest Stories of the Bible. And for those of you who haven't listened, what we're doing is using this kind of as a guide, sort of a template to give us some content to discuss throughout this year. Not only that, but I haven't even touched the book since I purchased it. So this year I decided to dust it off and see what kind of goodies we could come up with, what we had. Really excited about this episode. Unfortunately, and this was you'll really find that it was bothering me through the entire episode. The comparison, I mentioned this also, the comparison to the notes that I written up for Genesis chapter 2 through 11 is extended compared to the amount that we're actually able to get into within this episode. Now, you also note that within each chapter, there's a lot of information there. So we've actually missed a lot. I personally, from my personal view, I was having a very difficult time to actually keep the flow, I guess, or to keep my thoughts in line, because I was trying to keep it short. There was a lot of notes to go through, a lot of chapters. So I do apologize if there's a little bit of jumping around, a little bit of confusion, but overall, we had a great time recording this. And Michael White is actually joining us in this episode again. If you remember, he joined us for the end of the year episode last year, a little special that we did together, had a lot of fun. So he's come back to discuss what we have going on here. And we had a lot of fun doing this. So without further ado, let's get into this. And before we do get into this, I do want to make note that I did mention throughout this episode that I will post the notes on our Facebook page, but I'm actually going to try something different. I'm going to go ahead and put it as a blog post on our website. We're going to have a podcast page, so that way you can look through all the blog postings, our website postings of each episode. We're going to try that a little bit different this year. So the notes in the podcast will be on our website, cc412.org, in an article. Be sure to check that out. Michael, how are you doing today?
Hello. Good. Pretty good. Thanks for having me back on the show. Excited to be here.
Yeah, and I was really, I think we talked, well, we didn't, I don't think we did talk about this, maybe via email, but actually, no, we did, we talked about this beforehand, is, these notes that we have here, and I, quite honestly, there was a lot in here, which we've talked about, we've shared a little bit, Genesis 2 through 11, I mean, that's what? 8 chapters of information there. I mean, you could literally spend months on this alone. But so, I mean, we kind of had to really force this to be limited and to really to focus on this theme, like what we mentioned earlier, is the consequences of our rebellion. And I'm honestly, I found this to be so fascinating. Not the rebellion part, not the consequences, yeah. But I mean, just the information I pulled, and I think you can really see those in those notes that I pulled together. I honestly, I wanted to go further with that, and I really wish we had more time to spend on this. But I'm curious. Before we dive into this text, we'll start just for the sake of confusion here. Genesis chapter 2, we're talking about the creation of man and woman and the eating of the fruit. I'm curious if there's anything in particular you can tell me. You did actually talk about this. You shared this, that you talked about, you didn't talk about this. Ken Ham, he was at your church, is that correct?
Yeah, just this past week.
Yeah, so I'm curious, and I say this because I absolutely love his work. I love what he does. I love the ministry, and every single time I'm at the museum or he's a guest at a church or anywhere that I'm at that he's speaking, there's always the whole ooh, piece of candy, ooh, piece of candy, ooh, piece of candy with all his content. So my curiosity, and I might be going off on another direction here than what we had planned, but I'm a little curious, is there anything in particular that you've grasped from that what are we calling it? Talk, special guest, talk, speaker, meeting. Yeah. I don't know what those are called. I don't have a word.
I think the most interesting thing, and I've heard him speak probably about a year ago as well, is you grow up knowing the Bible, like you start in Genesis. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Like you know that. But then his whole business really emphasizes on how Genesis 1 through 11 answers everything. Basically, everything you could ever need to know in the rest of the Bible. Like it all points back to it. It all fits together. But then, that makes sense. Like, okay. But the part that always surprises me is how he mentions churches don't talk about this. They have just completely, like more and more over the years, they neglect to talk about it because some people, like you had a whole episode last time, are the old earth people and then the new earth. And they think it will cause so much turmoil to talk about that. And what was this and what was that? And they get so caught up that they stray away from that. And he has many books, but he talks about how because of that, at least in his opinion, that is why so many churches, as well as so many people, are just going astray. So whether they're in a church, but they're not following the Bible, and it's because they don't have the fundamental roots of what makes everything up, of like why, like the consequences of sin and rebellion and all of that. Like we need a savior. And if we didn't need a savior, why do we need Jesus? You need to start there. So to me, that's always shocking. I'm like, churches don't talk about that? What? That's so weird.
Yeah, and I think honestly, this is one that should be like one of the big things that churches do talk about. And like when I was originally was a couple years ago, I'm losing track of time, maybe 3 years with a question. I think that the church that I'm at, when I first was going there, I was there for maybe a couple weeks, and then I got a hold of the pastor. I was like, hey, give me a call. I just got a couple random questions, and that's actually one of the things I asked. Is like, what does the church believe about creation? And when I see it, and I talked about this in the last episode, is I don't really see there being any way that we can go into this concept of millions of years. And I think really that the reason why churches in general try to avoid this, or don't talk about it at all, or however they're personally not approaching it, I think it's because really it's so convicting. Some might not be well educated enough to be able to defend their case or anything, so wanting to avoid that. And I can understand that to a point. I mean, there's certain things we don't want to talk about because we don't know information. We have a particular view of it, but not we might believe it 100%, but there's still a lot of information those who oppose us could give us, and it's like, okay, well, now I feel pretty stupid because they've given me an entire encyclopedia and I've just given them one page of the newspaper. Mm-hmm. So, and I can understand that, but I mean, for me, Genesis itself, anytime I'm asked, and for me, it's very, very difficult. I'm asking you, what's your favorite book of the Bible, or what's your favorite chapter or verse? It's almost impossible for me to nail that down. And Galatians, it was on that list, and I absolutely enjoyed the series last year that I did, the little drive-by. Matthew 18, Philemon, and Genesis. Those are some of the top ones that I'd answer off, but it's very impossible for me to narrow it down. But I love Genesis because of the foundations that's found in this. I mean, this is really, without Genesis, I mean, we don't have a Bible at all. This is something God chose for, I would say, for probably obvious reasons. This is the beginning. This is how I established everything on earth. He chose to have Genesis put at the beginning of the Bible. He chose to make known, this is how I created. He chose to make known, these are who I created, and this is how they screwed it up. So, I mean, it's very important for us to dissect that. And I would probably say another reason might be poor hermeneutics. And I say that loosely. I don't want to say that's an absolute. It's, just a possible theory that they're not able to defend to defend that and say, well, here's what the Word of God says, and and so on. But I digress.
Yeah, and I would say if we get jumping back into the chapter 2, as I was like looking through that and kind of going off of what the devotional was saying and how it started out, was that we were, created in God's image, which is nowhere else, nothing else in creation has that honor, I guess you could say,
right.
of being created. And then they were talking about the distinction of like, we're in his image, but he is the creator. We are still his creation. And just like over, as we keep going within this, that is going to pop up of like, you think God is telling the truth. Is he really? You can be like that, and like kind of forgetting that. And also, and I mentioned like we're made from dust, from dirt, like, and I think in my notes it was, or some, maybe you put this in there too, in your notes, but like Adam in Hebrew is like a very similar name to meaning like dirt, dust, like it is almost literal, like the first man, we were from dirt. And then God breathed the life into us. And like that was a very special thing, but kind of brings you down a few pegs of like, we're dirt.
I've got to look that up. I mean, I've heard of that. I've been taught that. Or I'm curious now exactly what that... We're in Genesis 2, right? Yeah, Genesis 2. I'm curious what the Hebrew word for Adam is. Because now, since you've mentioned that, what I'm thinking is, and I feel free to criticize me, Michael, listeners, for lack of a better term, feel free to throw me in the dirt on this. But I'm thinking about this. I mean, you think of a creator or anybody who creates something, and they create. It's like, okay, I want to make something magnificent. I want to make it beautiful. I want to give it the most, very catchy name that that everybody's gonna, it's gonna catch everybody's attention. And I've created man. What am I gonna name him? Dirt. So, and that's
some good humor in there. I love to see that throughout the whole, like as we talked, the talking donkey, stuff like that. It's just like, I think God is humorous, even with his creation. When you see some of the weirdest looking creatures that just make you laugh when you see them, and you're like, what is this? What? Like, but they usually all have very specific reasons and purposes. But I think it's fun and funny, shows another side of God's character. Like, yeah.
Well, we have, what is this? I'm in Genesis something. I'm not in Genesis. I am in Genesis, but I looked up the Hebrew word, and Adam, A-W-D-A-W-M, is the pronunciation of it, but it just means red, like the color red, first man or city in Jordan. The Jordan Valley is the usages that we have here. So yeah, it just says here that it's the first man, but I want to see here because I didn't even catch that. I didn't have that in my notes. I think that was yours. What verse, man, that we're seeing this? Because I looked in Genesis chapter 3, verse 17. I'm trying to look in my commentary right now, not that you brought that up, to see if there's any comment on his particular name.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Okay.
Because I know I told Bill, for those listening, the own church reading that we're going through started in Genesis. So I've already been reading this every day. And then the devotional is like refreshing that. And then to prepare for this, I was also going through it. And then we have a home fellowship group that was last night at my house when we were recording this.
They're going through Genesis.
And guess what? We talk about what we read that week. So my mind is just like, so like 4 different places in a church we preach, the preacher or the pastor teaches from what we were reading about. So I'm like, oh, and then Ken Ham came and talked about all of this too. So I'm like, goodness, it won't be like this in the future episodes, but at least right now I have like 5 different like memories, and like, I don't know which one or where I saw.
Well, and there was a podcast I was listening to, Todd Friel, Wretched Radio. I don't know how old the episode was. I was kind of catching up on some old stuff, but I was at work. And he mentioned that he's founding a church down in Atlanta, Georgia. And for the first 5 months, he's been charged to give the sermons at this church, in its early establishment. And he's going through Matthew, and he made the point that that's literally the only thing that's on his mind is Matthew. I mean, he's as a radio host, he talks about various things throughout his shows, but throughout all of that, he's in Matthew. I mean, spending time not just studying the word, meditating on it, and bringing new light. So, I mean, just having Genesis on your brain, and from what your church is doing, your Bible study group is doing, what we're doing here, and whatever other Tom, Dick, and Harry is talking about, we're always going back to Genesis. That can be beneficial because it does give us a greater awe to what is being said here. But one of the things, let's go ahead and start with this. I personally don't have really too many thoughts. I don't think I have anything in my notes here for Genesis. No, I don't. Chapter 2, but I want us to, let's go ahead and dive into chapter 3. This was, we have here that in the verse 1, it says, "The serpent was more crafty than any other beast of the field that God had made. And he said to the woman, 'Did God actually say to you, you shall not eat of any tree in the garden?' And the woman said to the serpent, 'We may eat of the fruit of the trees in the garden, but God said, you shall not eat of the fruit of the tree in the midst of the garden, and neither shall you touch it, lest you die.'" So one of the things I think is interesting with that, and I want to pause right there, is because there's a couple things in the development that I was writing that really stood out to me through the various commentaries. And number one, I've actually talked about this many times in the past, is, and actually you did in our little episode that we did last year, you mentioned this too as well, is that she wasn't even scared or shocked or surprised. And I find that to be personally quite fascinating, because what that hints to, anyways, is that she expected a serpent to speak, or she expected these creatures to speak. So I had to do some more digging with that, and there's not a lot of 100% information on this particular issue, but I believe, as much as a lot of others do, and again, this is just theory, there's no absolute proof that we have, but that this is the Adamic, I can't even pronounce it right now, the Adamic, yes, we'll just go with that, the Adam language, the first language.
The dirt language.
The dirt language,
Dirty
yeah.
language? Uh-oh, not on this podcast.
Well, and I think that was part of the Adamic language, because, they had one language at this point in time, and this is playing out all the way up until Genesis 11, the fall. But within this, she's not surprised at all that a snake is speaking to her. There's actually one commentator that I have here, and for the sake of, I would say for your own protection, we're not going to cite this person. This does come from a Mormon theologian. So this is why I don't want to cite them. I don't want to endorse them. However, this particular quote does seem to be plausible within what might have happened within the conversations, the language of that time. This quote says, "The first language spoken by mortals, Adam and Eve, was either a celestial tongue of the gods, or such an adaptation of it was necessary to meet the limitations of mortality. Adam and his posterity had the power to speak, or the ability to speak. He had the ability to write, and he had the ability to read it." And when I was reading that, I can't remember where I came across that. I was just kind of curious as far as what the Adamic language said. But within that, I went down a rabbit hole, really, so I don't want to spend too much time there. I just find it to be absolutely interesting that at that period of time in history, they were literally able to talk to animals. I mean, there's different interpretations as far as what it could be a snake. I think it 100% was a literal snake, symbolic snake. It was a snake in all aspects. And I find myself actually always, not always, but certain times, really, I find myself, like, for an example, I had a dog about 2 years ago, and she passed away. She got sick, but how nice it would actually be if I could actually talk to my dog or actually understand what they were saying. But unfortunately we don't have that. I mean, you just gotta, it's like, okay, they're gonna nudge me for something. Either they're hungry, they want attention, they have to go to the bathroom. I have to guess. Mm-hmm. But the fall itself, what really is interesting is that this is one of the byproducts of one of the consequences here. And I want to jump ahead to, my mind, I apologize, my mind is going off in so many different directions right now with all of this, because there's like 5 different things that I'm seeing here, and I'm making up a number, but I'm seeing multiple things, multiple thoughts are going through my head, so I'm trying to pick one of them. Not exactly working out so well. So I want us to fast forward this, because this is really, I want us to try to focus on those first 3 questions I gave here, and just for the sake of confusion, the questions I shared is, why do we rebel against God and His Word? Because we'll see this in here. We'll find how we rebel, and we'll also find these consequences. But I find this to be interesting here. After they fall, after they eat the fruit, they realize that they are naked. So in verse 7, their eyes are opened, and they were naked. They sewed fig leaves together, and they made loincloths for themselves. So they're going off. They're dressing themselves the best they possibly can, as quick as they possibly can, because they know that, well, the next verse is when it says that they heard a sound from the Lord. So they're obviously at this point, they're covering up against each other. But then they're hearing God, okay, and now we've got to go and hide because the Lord is coming. So in verse 9, God is the one that takes the initial steps. He's the one saying, where are you? And they said, like, we heard you coming in the garden. We heard you, what was our verse here? I heard the sound of you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked and I hid myself. So, and then God's really confronting this. He says, who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree that I commanded you not to? So he's confronting them, playing, I wouldn't say playing dumb, but you see this sense. He's omnipotent. He knows everything. So there's really nothing they can do to hide, not even the truth. And he's asking the question, even he already knows the answer. Who told you they were naked? What makes you think that you're naked? Did you do something that you weren't supposed to do that informed you that you were naked? It's like, well, no, we didn't eat the fruit. But so he's asking this, is like, have you eaten this fruit? And then instead of saying, it's like, yeah, I did. Adam quickly, he's quick to say, no, I didn't. It was the woman. Or, well, he didn't say I didn't eat it, but he gave an excuse. It was the woman who you gave me. So there's 2 blames Adam is doing. He says, it's the woman who convinced me to eat it, and you gave her to me. So, and I want to be loose with this, whom you gave to be with me, because I think that can be taken 2 ways. It can be taken just simply in a sense of that woman that you gave me, but actually, no, I take that back. There is only one reason, because there's only one woman that exists at the time. He could have easily said it was the woman. If there was multiple women on the earth at the time, obviously we could say, as an identifier, who you gave me. Okay, we're separating from these other women. It's this particular woman here. So, it seems to me that Adam is playing the blame game. It's the woman's fault, and God, it's your fault because you gave her to me. But then...
And then what does the woman say?
Exactly. Confronting Eve, all right, Eve, you're up. What's your story? How do you know that you're naked? Well, I didn't do anything. It was the serpent who told me that I should eat this. He's the one who deceived me. But, and this is really one of the first consequences of rebellion against God, is they had just one command. That's it. One command here. Don't eat the fruit. You can do whatever you want. Eat in the garden. Talk to all the animals. Build really cool stuff out of dirt if you want to. Do whatever it is that you want to do to entertain yourselves. In fact, you can even commune with me face to face. Why? Because you're in a divine sense. But for whatever other reason here, and I personally believe, nothing in the text to say this, I personally believe that there could have been some sort of conversation going on within this. And I want to say that we should be careful with this, because I bring this up because this is kind of how I illustrate it in my mind. I don't think it was necessarily of the snake saying, okay, here's a fruit, you can eat it. And they say, okay, let's eat it. There had to be some sort of meditation going on, some sort of thinking, or perhaps even something that happened prior to this. Considering the text, she says that, where's this verse at? Okay, you shall not eat the fruit in verse 3. You shall not eat the fruit in the garden, neither shall you touch it, lest you die. So she's adding a word in there. God, all he said was, don't eat the fruit. But she adds, we shouldn't even touch it. So it's plausible that either one, she's mixing up what God actually said, or I think is actually a more plausible reasoning is Adam may have even instructed her prior to, in between when God gave that first command to this time where they're eating the fruit, or she's having the conversation with the snake, however long that happened, there may have been conversation in there where Adam is strongly instructing her. It's like, God said he doesn't want us to eat it. I don't want you to even go touch it, because I know that if you do touch it, you'll be tempted even further. So I think there's some sort of leeway with this as far as what kind of time gap there could have been. But again, we want to be careful with that, not to make it an absolute thing. But the bottom line here is they're asked, did you eat the fruit? I never told you that you're naked. I never even told you that you sinned against me. But you did something, didn't you? Well, I don't know. So what I think is interesting here is, what if they would have said yes? What if they would have admitted, yes, we've ate the fruit? And Michael, I'm actually asking you that question. What's your thoughts?
I think it would have been similar. Maybe the conversation would have been a little different, but I think the consequences still would have come, just because that was, like, in God's overall plan is, no, if he knows that he's going to create us and we are going to fall, I think it would probably still happen as far as the curses that are coming in death and everything after that. I think it might make them look a little bit better, though, for us, because I know if a church does talk about it, it's open up to, like, bashing them, like the man and then the woman, and now we have to pay for clothes because we know we're naked, and that, just the most random things come from that, of like, and they were trying to hide it and everything. But yeah, I think it would probably be the same outcome, because at the end of the day, and maybe that's what you're getting at, but sin is sin, and whether you do it, there will be consequences. And so I should have said that. That sounds a lot nicer, but like whether or not you did it, and then it's just going forward in the consequences and knowing that God can forgive you for that, but there will still be consequences, which are seen in the, right after that, when then he turns to the serpent and is like, because you have done this, cursed are,
Right.
And then I know it also, in my notes, it says like that, and I think Ken mentioned that too, is like, I think this is the first look at Jesus coming, like the first prophecy is like when it talks about, I should just read it, but
verse 15.
You can read it if you have it up in your, to keep it in the same translation.
Well, I'm going to jump to 15 since you mentioned the first mention of Jesus here. Genesis 3:15 says, I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring, this is referring to Satan's offspring, and her offspring, referring to the woman's offspring. So, and this is not, I think we could take this, it's primarily speaking about Jesus Christ here. This is the first prophecy, and we know this because he's the next the next sentence here, or the next line, it says, "He shall bruise your head." So this offspring that God is prophesying is clearly an individual. He will bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. But when I first look at this, or at least the first half, I will put enmity between you and the woman. So Satan and the woman, or Satan's offspring and her offspring, as we see in the next line, and between your offspring and her offspring. So there's, at that point in time, if we stop right there, there is a division of two kinds of people, the righteous and the unrighteous, the saved and the not saved, sinner, saint. So, and when I read that, I mean, that's one of the things that I personally see here is this animosity, this this conflicting views between believers, children of God, and children of Satan. There's always going to be that animosity, and I think I want to say this loosely, I think that's one of the things we can pull from this is where it begins, but then God gets more specific, and this is the primary use of offspring. This is the primary identifier of offspring. This is Jesus Christ, because it says clearly that he's a he. But it's interesting that God is prophesying something before the condemnation or before the consequences are even made known. And I find that to be, really a beautiful thing, because you would think, I've sinned against God, I've eaten the fruit, what's he going to do? Well, he said we're going to die. I've never experienced death. I don't know what death is like. We've never even seen any of these animals die. Everything is alive and it's been flourishing for as long as it has. What is this death you speak of, God? I'm scared. So, for God to come on the scene and first he's cursing Satan, and then he's prophesying the Messiah, that he's going to bruise the head of Satan. I mean, I would say that's probably comforting. It's like we were talking about beforehand, this whole sandwich concept. You start off with the good. It's like, guys, I know you're a little scared. I know I promised you death, but wait, there's more. So he starts off with this concept of there's going to be somebody that's going to put a stop to all this. He's going to completely destroy Satan in the long run. And then, the whole sandwich thing, good, bad, good. I like that, by the way. I don't think I've ever heard of that.
Yeah.
So then we talk about, okay, now, woman, here's the consequences of your sin. You're going to be giving, surely you will multiply I will surely multiply your pain in childbearing, and pain shall bring in your pain you'll bring forth children. Your desire shall be contrary to your husband, and there's another consequence too. And he shall rule over you. So the woman's role here, I don't want to say role, because if I say role, then I'm saying, your role is to be in pain. I don't want to say that at all. Yeah. But the consequences of this is pain. And not just childbirth, but anytime we commit any sort of sin, there is a hurt that comes into play. At this point in time, I'm trying to think of something. A personal relationship, best friend, sister. I don't remember what it was that we were arguing about, but I remember getting upset years ago, so much that I didn't talk to my sister for a week, and I've never done that. I've never been so mad that I haven't talked to her for a week. I don't remember what it was, but there was whoever was in sin. I really don't remember any details. There was an issue there. There was pain, and one of the consequences of this sin, whoever was at fault, don't remember. There was a lack of communication. There was a sense of what's happened to our relationship, what's happened to my sister, what's happened to my brother, and I don't know what she thought. We didn't talk about it. All I remember is us texting one day, and then we're all hunky dory. But this is one of the consequences. Is there's hurt in relationships. There's hurt in our lives. For an example, if you're at work, you do something you're not supposed to. Let's say your boss asks you to go do option A, and instead you do option A, but you select option B or a different direction or a different way of doing this. Consequences to that. You didn't make it to work on time, you left early, whatever other issue you want to throw in there, there's consequences to that. And that hurt that's coming in there is you're going to get some points on your employee record, and you're also going to lose a little bit of pay because either you came in late or you left early, whatever that might consist of. You were sent home. You make X amount of money per week. You're tracking your finances based off that, but now that you're out those couple hours, there's a lot of stuff. A lot of different directions we can go with that, but this is one of the things that comes into play because we rebel against God, because we sin. One of the consequences of this is pain, suffering. And then another issue here that we see is that your desire shall be contrary to your husband. This is, I think husbands and wives can testify to this, is that there's not always that agreement. There's not always that mutual understanding. One person, and the husband himself, should be the leader of the family. But God is making it clear. It's like there's going to be contradictions. You as the husband are going to want to do it one way, but your wife is going to think she has a better way of doing things. You might ask her to go do something. Hey, can you take this $20 for an example and go give the car a wash? Whatever. I'm just pulling an excuse out here, but give the car a wash. And okay, well, I'm going to take the car out, but I'm going to go take this $20 and either put gas in it, which is a good idea, or I'm going to go buy a new purse. Whatever excuse is going on, there's going to be that sort of contradictions that's taking place, and it's not just in mother or husband and wife. I mean, this concept, I think, I would say that this could be through everything. And, the husband and the wife, the mother and the father, is really the chief of all relationships. So I would say that encompasses everything.
And you see that in the next chapter, not like, well, finish your thought, but like once they start having kids and you see the kind of kids they have and like, oh man, we jump to it right away, at least in how it's written is like, oh, look at these nice brothers, Cain and Abel. And then in just a few verses, he takes them aside with a rock, kills them. Like, oh, wow. I would have liked to know a little more about, their kids, but like, man, you see it pretty quickly of how that really enters in, of not just the pain of giving birth to them, but also then the pain that they had to live with of, having Cain be sent away. And then I think even within that, when I read it, it says like they had many, many children, and then they get to Seth. And I'm like, how many children did they have him? Like, we chose Seth. Okay, he's an important one, but right. Just kind of crazy how, from that you see like, wow, really quickly it goes to that. And I would say even with the man of like the work that you're going to have to do is going to be hard and toilsome and just all of that, which even fast forward to today where people want to be retired by the time they're 30. And, all of this, at least what I'm seeing and have seen in the last couple of years with my own business and thinking I want to network with entrepreneurs and being like, no, I actually don't, because they all want this like easy life. But even going back, like, it's not going to be an easy life. Like, work is going to be hard. And whether it's like your actual job, like some people, if you love what you do, it's not a problem. But at the core of it, like, it isn't going to be easy. And why? We'll start in Genesis 1 through 11. but like where we are right now, like it very clearly says like the ground is going to be cursed. Like, goodness, man.
Yeah, and I want to jump into Cain and Abel because there's some thoughts in there too. But just a quick comment on the consequences of Adam or what he's got to deal with. Yeah, I mean it's going to be a rough, verse. I'm just picking a verse here as an example, verse 18, talking about him toiling the ground. It says, "Thorns and thistles shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the plants of the field." Verse 19, "By the sweat of your face you shall eat the bread until you return to the ground." So basically God is saying, is like, okay, because you've committed a sin against me, because you've lied to me, or let me rephrase that, because you didn't confess your sin, these are the consequences. I think it would have been a lesser consequence, like you mentioned earlier, if they would have admitted, yes, God, we've done this, we're sorry, they would have repented. I believe they would have been forgiven, and I mean they may have had consequences. We don't know what those would be because they obviously didn't happen, but I think they would have been lesser as well. But there's another example. There is the hardship that we face in our work. I mean they had it made in the garden. I mean literally everything grew by itself. They had conversations, theoretically speaking. They had conversations with these animals, conversations with each other. I mean, whatever else they would have done in the garden, I have no idea. But now he's got to work his butt off just to put food on the table.
And I think that can really go with us too, is, like you're saying, everybody's wanting to be retired by the time they're 30. I want to be retired by the time I'm 30, and I'm 34.
4 years too late, yeah.
Yeah.
And I've got 1 year to go, so I'm like,
Yeah.
it's not going to happen.
So, I'd love that. But, a part of me, like, my mentality, like, I don't want to have millions of dollars. I personally want enough to take care of the expenses, maybe a couple extra thousand, whatever the math consists of, per month. So that way I can do some recreational stuff with family, some traveling, whatever else. Go explore the Holy Lands, because that's absolutely on my list. But I would still have to work. I don't know how not to work. I've got so many projects that I do to keep myself occupied. And even knowing that I have too much going on right now, I'm like, ooh, there's something else I can do.
Yeah.
So, and I have a feeling you can kind of relate to that too. But I think, God, to take the easy way out, being deceived by Satan, eat the fruit, they're convinced that you're going to have your best life now, to quote a heretic. You're going to have your best life now, and then only to find out, okay, maybe we shouldn't have done it that way, because now things are a lot harder. And to get back to where we once were is never going to happen, but now we've got to learn to live with this. And that can go in any direction, such as you're talking about retirement. They want this whole get-rich-quick scheme, everything on their plate right now on a silver platter. But if it's too good to be true, Adam and Eve are a good example that it's probably not true.
Yeah. And I think from the devotional too, I think it was either today or yesterday's, so a Wednesday, Thursday, I don't know. It's not, the Friday is the prayer day. So it was one of the days this week, but it talked about, like, we need to trust God and obey God. And if we trust him, it shouldn't be a problem to obey him. And it was kind of talking on that subject of, he related to kids, which I don't have kids, but I'm around kids, and I've been a kid, as has everyone listening. But it mentioned, like, how are you going to obey if you don't trust the person who's telling you why to do it? You will, right, maybe a couple of times, and we don't know how long they did obey, but ultimately when you stop trusting, in this case, stop trusting God that he, and it can be in anything in your life, that he will take care of you, then you can start veering off the path. And even with traffic laws, like everything, if we trust that we have a speed limit, we're not supposed to be on our phone, whatever, to protect human life or whatever the reason may be, then we're more likely to obey it. And so I think that was the most interesting thing that I've picked up kind of in this, from the devotional, as far as what they had mentioned of, like, oh, that's so true. And then kind of looking into it in my own life, I'm like, is that when things get trickier, is like, are your eyes, like, we should always have our eyes on the Lord. Like, there's so many verses, like, keep your eyes focused on him. But like, when you stop doing that, and then when you stop trusting, then what are you leaving behind? Oh, are you still going to obey? And I think that is in most people's life of, it's so tempting once you do sin, if you feel bad about it, then it's, oh, well, then I shouldn't pray today, or I shouldn't read the word. And it's like, that's the opposite of what you should do, and I've even seen that too, of like just the nudging, like, oh, well, maybe I shouldn't read the Bible this morning. I'm like, no, Michael, that is the opposite of what you should be doing, because you need to repent and come back to God, and he wants to still have that relationship with you. And so that is kind of, I don't know, I think that is one of the trickier things with us being humans and being sinful by nature, of just like knowing we have the Creator there and putting all of our trust in him, and then obeying as well.
Yeah, and I think, on that, on your to add to reading the Bible, I agree 100%. That we can get in those mentalities. Maybe I shouldn't pray because I feel guilty of this, or feeling inadequate. When you're in prayer, you're in conversation with God. You're in the presence of God. When you're in the Word, you're in conversation with God. You're in the presence of God. And, to think I just committed a sin 5 minutes ago, 2 days ago, whatever time period you want to put in there, I don't feel qualified. I agree 100%. I mean, that's the most important time to get into His Word, is when we do these things, because the more you're into the Word, the more saturated you are with it, the more guided by it that you are. You know, you go off and you're reading chapter 1, 2, 3, 4 this morning, and then you're going off and doing whatever it is throughout the day. And while there's an event that takes place, like, well, you know, I just read about this experience, this guidance, you know, this very same issue that I'm dealing with in life, I just read about in God's Word today. God said to go left instead of going right, or vice versa. And I have the same experience in front of me. And I just realized this. I do apologize. I want to cut that short. I just realized we're at 43 minutes. So one of us is probably talking too much, and I'm going to take the blame for that. Let me. I wanted
onto the flood.
Yeah. Well, and I want to make
kill
note
everyone
of that.
now. Kill everyone but Noah and his family. It's a good
and that's
segue.
pretty much where we're at. So, I mean, we'll get to quite a bit later on. Maybe I'll do a little side piece throughout this week. I don't know. We'll figure something out. But yeah, so onto the flood. I mean, what? I gotta let the audience know about this. Okay, so I was writing these notes, and I've at the end of the year, the goal is to have these notes compiled up to have accessible to the audience. But as I was writing these notes, and Michael, he noticed this, is I went into great detail with Adam and Eve. What do we have here? Cain and Abel. I think, yes, Cain and Abel here. And then the sins of Cain. And then there's a one line.
You should read it.
I'm going to.
You want me to read it?
Go ahead.
Genesis 6. The world has become so corrupt that He sends a flood to cleanse the earth. That's it. Then we go to chapter 11.
That's the in-depth detail commentary of the flood account. And the reason I did that is because we are at 44 minutes into this recording here. But there's really so much. We have Genesis, what do we say? 1 and 2, 2 and 3. Anyways, we've got like 8 chapters that we're going through within this episode. So there's a lot here that we're not going to be able to get to. I would encourage everybody to go deeper within this. Don't just take what we say as the absolute 100% information that's in the text, because I promise you my notes say otherwise. And other scholars would say otherwise, or the theologians, pastors, and so on. But yeah, let's actually jump to Genesis chapter 11. Let's talk about the Tower of Babel, because this is what I found to be interesting. Actually, because I've talked so much, I want you to go ahead and share any thoughts that you have, and then I'll kind of so-called pick up the slack.
Yeah, I had mentioned this last night in the home fellowship group. The thing I found so interesting was you have these people, they want to reach their way up to God, become God, you know, what those similar intentions, and then they all speak the same language, which is noted. Like, that's a very important thing. And then God disperses them, changes their language so they can't do that. And my thoughts, when I was looking at it, I'm like, fast forward to today. What is happening? We have so many translation things that you can basically, like, Google, hold your phone up and you can talk to anybody. So we're all, like, we can all communicate really well. And then what's the other element? We're all trying to live forever, utilizing AI, cutting off our heads, freezing them. Like, it's progressed beyond that, of putting chips in, saving our personalities, trying to save our soul by human means. And so what I'd asked the group, I'm like, that to me is like, whoa, like, that is so weird that as we see now, like, we kind of have those same intentions of the people, and God doesn't allow that to happen. Like, in the Bible, He clearly didn't. And a lady in the group was like, and it says the end of times will be like the days of Noah, and like all of that leading up to this. And I'm like, oh, that's also very interesting. So my thought was like, does that mean like the end is coming? Because like as we progress, like God isn't gonna let that come. At least I don't think He will, at least basing it from this text. But that was kind of like an interesting thing, seeing now of like our intentions as a society and culture, like worldwide, with the world governments trying to come together. And I was just like, man, it's creepy. And also, everyone should just read chapter 11 and see how did it go for these people, because
Right.
like it did not go well.
When I was reading this, I would say a couple of years ago is really, I don't remember the source. I remember reading it on an article. I was thinking about the Tower of Babel today at work, and they're building a monument to their power. Let me see where I can find the text. Do I have the text in our notes here? Yes, verse 4. That's what I have there. So what we have here in verse 4, they said, let us build ourselves a city, a great tower, with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we disperse over the face of the whole earth. So they're wanting to really make a name, a monument to who they are, their power, their might, their population, their intellect, everything that comes with being a great kingdom, nation, society. And God says no. But what I think is interesting, I was actually relating this to our modern times, is the Twin Towers. I think it was 2001, give or take, is when those fell. I remember reading an article years ago, and I should probably see if I can't find it again, but I remember reading that the towers themselves were a monument, America's monument to its wealth and power. And when I read that, I was really blown away. I was like, wow, I was like, well, now it makes sense as far as why it fell. And people would say, it's like, well, okay, well, terrorists did that. It wasn't God. Well, it was also an ungodly nation which did it. And many times throughout the Bible, God uses these ungodly nations to bring judgment upon others. Now, I'm not saying America is a godly nation. By no means. All I'm saying...
Not anymore.
Yeah, not anymore. But all I'm saying here is God uses nations to take down nations. And I see it relates because the Tower of Babel was the monument to their wealth and their power and everything, of their greatness. And likewise, the Twin Towers was a monument to America's greatness. So, and I think we can really learn from this is don't make tall buildings because it's just going to fall down. But this I believe. I can't really speak much on this. I want to talk a little bit about it in the next episode, and I'm very limited in my knowledge on the issue, so I don't want to give away too many spoilers. I'm going to just try to hold off as much as I can. But the history and the stuff that's going on at this point in time, when this tower's being taken or built up, this was a pagan thing. I'm trying to censor myself as I'm talking. But you know what? I'm going to hold off on that. Until next week. But I think it's a lesson to be learned is that our greatness is not found in material wealth. It's not found in how big of a building we have, how big of a car we have. And I think that's really a sin that takes place in our mindset too, is because we can get in this mentality that we have all of these things. I've succeeded. I make tens of thousands of dollars per month. I've did all of these things on my own and so on. Much like Nebuchadnezzar, which we'll probably get to later on in the year. But then God says, okay, I'm going to show you just how much power you have. I'm going to show you just how much wealth you have. I'm going to show you how united, such as Babylon, I'm going to show you how united you as a people really are. Or more specifically, united with me, God, you actually are. But, and that's one of the consequences too, is failure. When we become so prideful, we can really find that we learn just how prideful we are when we lose everything, and we're really realizing that our hearts was in the wrong place. It was not in God's word. That's all I have at this moment in time. Do you have any other comments you want to throw in there?
Yeah, I would say on the subject of being prideful and thinking how good we are and all of that, when you fast forward to the gospel, specifically Matthew 16:24, it says, "If anyone would come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for me will find it." And I think that kind of relates in just like we always want for ourselves, for our family. But what does he say multiple times? Like, you must deny yourself, like, of those and follow him. And like, we're wanting to save our lives. Like, we want to do that so bad. But then what do you say? If you want to save it, you're going to lose it. If you're willing to lose it, you will save it. So I think that kind of ties in as well and is a really good perspective as we get towards the end of this of like, yes, the Bible, it all goes back to what? Genesis 1-11. Ken would be so happy right now.
See, yeah, and I was really tickled by you bringing that up because before we connected, I was scrolling social media, and that was one of the images that I saw. Somebody shared that text itself. It was in a picture, word for word. I mean, and I, every time I read that, I think it's like, mankind itself would be so much better. Instead of living for yourself, instead of living for your own success and power and recognition and everything, be willing to give that up and live for Jesus Christ. Because as Christ himself makes it perfectly clear, that is the only way that you will ever have a good life. One actual theologian says, going back to this whole your best life now concept, and we'll have to wrap this up, and we both got stuff going on here, is for the unbeliever, this is the best life that they have now. For the Christian, of course, this is our worst life now.
Yeah.
So,
which makes you think if you are really liking your life, whoa, just get excited, fellows.
yeah, it's the best you got. Now, and I really wish, I'm going to have to actually work on these notes. I mentioned having to shorten these up because there's a lot of information. I think I'm probably going to share this document for this week. I'm going to share this on our on the ministry page because there's a lot in here that I want to make known to the listeners. And I think this is really why I was having a really hard time sharing what I shared, because I was trying to censor a lot of it, trying to weed by comparison with what I was writing down. But at the same time, trying to compile everything. So we'll have to refine that as we progress. Michael, I would ask, do you have any closing comments, questions, thoughts?
Yeah, I would say if we're going back to the devotional, kind of a wrapping up of what it kind of covered was we were created in God's image. Woohoo, that's awesome. He's still the creator and we are the creation. Sin is there. We are sinful people. There's nothing you can do to not be that. But then he also wants the best for us, and we need to trust and obey him, and knowing that he wants the best for us. That's why the Bible is there, like the directives he's giving. And that's something that's harder, I think harder and harder for what they say, the younger generations, but really all of us, of knowing like, if you've grown up with the Bible, you know what you should do, but are you going to do it? Right. And why? Like, God says we shouldn't do this, but does he? And then you get into, well, that was Old Testament, and in the New Testament, he says this, but some things, like, if you got to go so far back and forth, I'm like, then you probably know you shouldn't be doing it.
Right.
I think that kind of wraps up what, like, the book was hitting on of, like, knowing all of these things. And then from the Ken Ham speech, what I always find so funny, he showed, like, 5 different verses, male and female, he created them. Here, male and female. Male marries wife, they become one flesh. Right. And just like to throw in a little of the political side, but I had a coworker who was a Christian, goes to church, was in the worship band, and he had one of the pronoun pins, which who knows your thoughts on it if you're a listener, but I always wanted to tell him, like, buddy, go back to Genesis. I know you are a boy, that you are male, because guess what? Yeah. There's male and female. God created them. Right. Which sometimes, like, the stupid simple stuff, I'm like, you can have a good laugh about it, but also, like, do you see where society is? Like, man, they need to go back and read some of this.
Yeah, and and I've got some thoughts on that too. Well, we're getting short on time. I'm gonna leave that
wrap it up, and I just bring up way too much.
Yeah, because it's like I got something to say. I got something for you. Let me tell you about that. So we'll leave that go. I'm just staring at these notes. I mean, there's so much there that I wish I could have gone through. But yeah, we'll just force this to a close, and I'm gonna go cry in a corner. But that's all we're gonna run short on time. So I do apologize, everybody. A lot we didn't cover. Next week might be a little different. Next week we're only going over one chapter. So
Spurgeon.
Yeah, yeah. So hopefully we can actually get a little bit more in there for you, rather than having to chop up what I did. But I will share the notes itself on our ministries page, Christian Cornerstone 412 Ministries, so that way you guys can get the full scope of what I was not able to share here. So without further ado, Michael, I want to thank you for coming on, sharing your thoughts, and I look forward to talking to you again next week.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Thank you.
And that, my friends, is a wrap. That was Michael White joining us for this episode. We had a fun time talking about it. Looking forward to our next episode where we're going to be discussing Genesis chapter 12. I would encourage you, if you haven't, to get the book that we have been discussing and follow along. We have a long journey, a very fun and exciting journey ahead of us. You can find the link to the book that we are discussing, 52 of the Greatest Stories of the Bible by John Allen Turner and Kenneth Boa, within the link of the description below. And I would encourage you guys, if you haven't already, consider supporting us. You can do this a number of different ways. You can like, subscribe, share, rate, and comment the podcast. You can follow us on Facebook at Christian Cornerstone 412 Ministries, where we put a lot more information up. And then also, if interested, and the Lord is drawing you to this, I'd encourage you to join us on our Patreon page and become a monthly supporter there, a low cost of $5 per month. And as we continue to develop, we'll be adding some more content, and our supporters will be getting some VIP goodies. So I'd encourage you to check that out. And until our next episode, you guys have yourself a very wonderful week, and God bless.